The FAST1 is a really effective medical device, and it's going to save a lot of lives. But users have to know how to use it properly, so I'm going to walk you through all the steps on this cadaver. After the decision has been made to use the FAST1 and a packaged system has been obtained, the first step will be to undo or cut the patient's shirt to expose the sternum. You want to make sure that the clothing won't interfere with you placing the device. At this point, you should also check that there's no trauma to the sternum. Once the site has been exposed, it's important to use proper aseptic technique. The insertion site is located at the top of the sternum, just below the sternal notch. Once the site is cleaned, we're ready to start placing the device. For a successful insertion, you need to have the target patch in the correct location. Before you landmark the position of the patch, remove the top half of the backing. It's labeled 1. Use an index finger to feel the patient's sternal notch while holding the patch in your other hand. Place your finger into the notch and make sure your finger is perpendicular to the manubrium. You'll notice that if your finger is not at the right angle, you may place the patch further down the sternum or too far up the sternum. With your finger correctly aligned with the patient's notch, place the patch so that the notch in the patch is aligned with the patient's sternal notch. Push it right up against your finger. Check that the patch is aligned with the patient's sternal notch and that the target hole is directly over the patient's midline. If everything looks correct, you can press down on the top half of the patch. Then, remove the bottom half of the backing. It's labeled 2. Press down the patch securely onto the patient's chest. These tabs can be used if the patch doesn't stick properly by applying tape to hold the patch to the patient's chest. Again, the patch is critical in placing the device because it shows where to insert the infusion tube. After the patch has been put in place, verify once more that positioning is correct and that the notches match and that the target zone is directly over the patient's midline. After the patch has been placed, the insertion is ready to begin. Before you take the sharps cap off the introducer, locate the foam-filled sharps plug in the FAST1 package. The plug will be used immediately after the insertion. Pick up the introducer and remove the clear sharps cap by twisting it slightly and pulling it away. Keep your hands well clear of the needles at all times. Keep the cap close by as you'll replace it later. Right before inserting the introducer, check again that the patch is correctly placed by again holding your finger at the sternal notch. Hold the introducer handle with a firm grip and place the bone probe needles into the target zone. Make sure that all the needles are within the zone. During the insertion, proper technique is very important. For the depth control mechanism to function properly, the introducer needs to be inserted perpendicular to the manubrium. When you place the needles inside the target zone, make sure that the needles and the introducer handle are at a 90-degree angle to the skin. Once you've got the angle correct, you can start pressing down. To insert the infusion tube, you need to push with a firm, increasing force. Keep your wrist and your elbow in line with the introducer to make sure that the force is axial all the way through the insertion. Don't use extreme force, just push down steadily and stay in control. Don't twist or jab the device. While you're pushing down, you're pushing the infusion tube through the overlying tissue and through the bone into the marrow space. Here we go. As the infusion tube reached the correct depth, the handle separated from the tube. You heard a distinct release, and at this point, the handle moved forward. Now, I simply pull straight back on the introducer, and the infusion tube is in place. The sharps in the introducer are now contaminated, and they should be protected immediately. Locate the sharps plug and place it face up on a level surface. Insert the introducer fully, and the sharps are now protected. Locate the clear sharps cap and place it over the end of the device. Twist it into place, and the device is now fully secure for transport or disposal. Once the infusion tube has been placed in the patient, it needs to be connected to the fluids that you'll be infusing. Attach the end of the infusion tube to the right angle female connector on the patch. Don't connect the infusion tube directly to IV fluids. The connector tubing is designed to flex and to move, providing strain relief and keeping force off the tube itself. Once the infusion tube has been attached to the connector tubing, you can attach the straight female connector to the IV fluid source. When we open the clamp, the fluid starts to flow immediately. You may find that the initial flow rate is slow. If this is the case, it may help to do a 10 cc flush with saline. The flush with saline can help clear any blockages and improve the flow rate. Finally, to protect the site, place the protector dome directly over the patch, matching up the Velcro rings. Press down firmly around the periphery of the dome. Putting the dome on keeps the infusion site secure, making sure that fluid flow isn't disrupted.